In the early morning of April 22, 2019, a Beechcraft 58 Baron lifted off from West Houston Airport, its pilot confident and passengers unaware of the unseen risks lurking in the details. Beneath the polished exterior of the aircraft, unnoticed miscalculations and small oversights were quietly setting the stage for disaster. The journey began smoothly, but the delicate balance of aviation was about to tip. With razor-thin margins and no room for error, this is the story of November 501, Charlie Echo's last flight. The aircraft involved in the flight was a Beechcraft 58 Baron, registered as November 501 Charlie Echo, a twin-engine light aircraft known for its reliability and versatility in executive and general aviation. The journey commenced at West Houston Airport, a regional airport serving private and general aviation needs, located in Houston, Texas. The departure was logged at 7:30 a.m. Central Daylight Time, with the aircraft bound for Kerrville Municipal Airport, located in the Texas Hill Country. This destination is often frequented for business, leisure, or transit purposes due to its proximity to Kerrville's scenic landscapes and commercial hubs. The flight was under the command of Jeffrey Weiss, a highly skilled pilot with over 5,000 hours of flight experience, reflecting his extensive proficiency in both the technical and operational aspects of aviation. At the age of 65, Weiss brought a seasoned perspective to the cockpit, emphasizing safety and confidence in his role as pilot. The passenger list comprised 5 individuals, each traveling for undisclosed executive or personal purposes. Among them were Stuart Robin Kensinger, 55, Angela Webb Kensinger, 54, Mark Damian Ciano, 58, Scott Reagan Miller, 55, and Mark Tellefson, 45. Before the flight, the pilot estimated 54 usable gallons of fuel on board, sufficient in his judgment to complete the trip despite falling 4 gallons short of the legal reserve requirements. However, the plane's weight and center of gravity were already slightly beyond allowable limits, deterring him from adding more fuel. Unbeknownst to the pilot, his actual fuel levels were significantly lower than estimated due to a discrepancy in the fuel logging process over several previous flights. The tanks held only 42 gallons of usable fuel, leaving no room for error or unforeseen delays. The Baron departed West Houston Airport around 7:30 a.m. and progressed uneventfully for most of the journey. However, nearing Kerrville Municipal Airport, weather conditions deteriorated with an overcast layer at 1,200 feet. Unable to execute a visual approach, the pilot requested a GPS approach to runway 12. Air traffic control directed the aircraft to the Obuco waypoint, located 12.5 nautical miles beyond the airport, extending the flight path and increasing fuel consumption. At 8:24 a.m., just 35 nautical miles from Kerrville, the unthinkable happened. The Baron's engines sputtered, their reassuring hum replaced by a haunting silence as both quit almost simultaneously. Fuel exhaustion had stolen their power. In a desperate bid to save everyone on board, the pilot managed to restart the left engine, a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. But critical actions, feathering the lifeless right engine's propeller and retracting the flaps, were missed in the panic, leaving the plane burdened by drag it couldn't overcome. Overloaded and unbalanced, the Baron began to falter, unable to hold the sky as gravity tightened its grip. Breaking through the thick overcast at just 500 feet above the ground, the pilot fought desperately to bring the aircraft in line with the approach course. The ground loomed closer, the stakes unbearably high. As the airspeed dipped below 83 knots, its fragile threshold of control, the Baron's fate was sealed. The plane began an uncontrollable roll to the right, its struggle against gravity and physics a heartbreaking battle. Yet, even in those harrowing moments, the pilot fought with every ounce of skill and determination to soften the blow, keeping the wings nearly level in a final courageous effort to save lives. But it wasn't enough. The Baron succumbed to the inevitable, crashing into the ground with devastating force. The lives of all 6 on board were extinguished in an instant, leaving behind a story of bravery, heartbreak, and unbearable loss. So, how did a flight that began so uneventfully spiral into a devastating sequence of errors? The crash of November 501 Charlie Echo was a devastating result of numerous interconnected mistakes in planning, decision-making, and execution, all of which combined to create a situation with little margin for error. These errors began well before the aircraft left the ground. The pilot knowingly departed West Houston Airport with only 42 usable gallons of fuel, falling 4 gallons short of the legal reserve requirement. His calculations suggested that the flight would require 38 gallons, leaving just 4 gallons for contingencies, well below the regulatory requirement of a 45-minute reserve. While this decision might have seemed acceptable in ideal conditions, it left no buffer for unexpected delays, changes in weather, or deviations from the planned route. Adding to this was the fact that the aircraft was slightly over its maximum gross weight due to the combined load of 5 passengers and their belongings. To accommodate the additional weight, the pilot opted not to take on more fuel, further reducing his safety margins. The aircraft's center of gravity was also slightly aft of the prescribed limits, adding to the instability of the plane in critical situations. These decisions illustrate a misjudgment of priorities, as safety should have taken precedence over passenger convenience or payload. A better approach would have been to reduce the weight of the aircraft, perhaps by limiting passenger luggage or coordinating alternative travel arrangements for one passenger. This would have allowed for additional fuel, ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements and providing a critical buffer for unforeseen circumstances. The pilot's reliance on faulty instrumentation and manual fuel tracking systems further compounded the risk. The aircraft was equipped with an engine data monitoring system and a manual fuel log, both of which required accurate manual inputs after each refueling. Over the preceding 8 days and 5 flights, the pilot had consistently failed to input the correct data, leading to an overestimation of the fuel on board. Moreover, the fuel tank transmitters were defective, causing the gauges to display higher fuel levels than were actually present, specifically a surplus reading of approximately 5 gallons per wing tank. The fuel tanks themselves were marked only at 40 and 60 gallons, meaning that fuel levels below the 40-gallon tab required careful visual estimation. Unfortunately, during his abbreviated pre-flight inspection, the pilot did not perform a visual check of the tanks, leaving him unaware of the actual fuel quantity. A thorough pre-flight inspection, including a detailed visual check of the fuel levels, could have revealed the shortfall and prompted a reassessment of the flight's feasibility. During the flight, the situation grew more precarious as the weather at Kerrville Municipal Airport deteriorated, with an overcast layer at 1,200 feet preventing a visual approach. The pilot requested a GPS approach to runway 12, and air traffic control directed the aircraft to a waypoint 12.5 nautical miles beyond the airport. This extended flight path increased fuel consumption, further depleting the already insufficient reserves. At this stage, the pilot could have declared a fuel emergency, a decision that would have prioritized his flight and potentially allowed for a more direct routing to the airport. Declaring an emergency is a critical tool available to pilots in distress, and in this case, it might have bought the pilot valuable time to manage the fuel shortage and avoid the crisis. As the aircraft neared Kerrville, both engines failed due to fuel exhaustion. In the moments that followed, the pilot managed to restart the left engine, demonstrating composure and technical skill. However, critical steps in the emergency response were missed. The pilot failed to feather the propeller of the inoperative right engine, an action that would have significantly reduced drag and improved the aircraft's glide performance. Additionally, he did not retract the flaps, which further increased drag and accelerated the descent rate. These omissions left the aircraft unable to maintain level flight, particularly given its weight and aft center of gravity. Following the manufacturer's emergency procedures, which outline these steps, could have stabilized the situation and provided additional time to either reach the airport or execute a controlled off-field landing. As the Baron descended below the overcast layer at 500 feet above ground level, the pilot attempted to align with the approach course and arrest the descent. However, the airspeed dropped below 83 knots, the Baron's minimum controllable airspeed. At this point, retracting the flaps and carefully managing the remaining engine's power could have helped prevent the loss of control. Maintaining a higher airspeed by prioritizing aerodynamic efficiency was essential to avoid the VMC roll that ultimately led to the crash. Instead, the aircraft became uncontrollable, rolling to the right in its final moments. Despite the dire circumstances, the pilot fought to keep the wings level and minimize the impact force, but the aircraft ultimately crashed, killing all 6 occupants on board. After the investigation, the NTSB ultimately determined the crash was caused by the pilot's inadequate fuel planning and management, compounded by failure to follow emergency procedures and maintain controllable airspeed, leading to a loss of control. This tragedy highlights the importance of making safety-oriented decisions at every stage of flight. For example, departing with adequate fuel reserves, even at the cost of reducing payload, could have ensured compliance with regulations and provided room for contingencies. A thorough pre-flight inspection, including visual verification of fuel levels, might have uncovered discrepancies in the fuel system and prevented the flight from proceeding under such risky conditions. Declaring a fuel emergency, rather than attempting to manage the situation silently, could have prioritized the flight and reduced the likelihood of a catastrophic outcome. Finally, rigorous training and regular practice in emergency procedures, such as handling engine failures and managing drag, could have prepared the pilot to respond more effectively under stress. After all, this story is a gentle nudge to remember how every decision in aviation is like a domino. Each one nudges the next, and even the smallest can have a big impact down the line. From double-checking your fuel levels during pre-flight to staying sharp on emergency procedures, every step counts. Meticulous preparation, sticking to safety protocols, and staying flexible when the skies throw you a curveball are the keys to a smooth flight. So, take the extra minute, run the checklist one more time, and give yourself that margin for the unexpected. It's all about keeping the skies safe and the landing soft. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.